I'm Madison Wilson, 28, and I never thought I'd be the one to destroy my father. The courtroom fell silent as Dad's lawyer demanded Mom get nothing after 25 years of marriage. My hands trembled in my lap, the secret I'd kept for years burning inside me. Dad looked so confident, so entitled as he sat there in his expensive suit, while Mom shrank in her chair. The judge seemed to be buying every word of their lies. I knew if I stayed silent, Mom would lose everything. 2 words had the power to change it all. 2 words I finally had the courage to say. If you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right, you'll understand my struggle. Let me know where you're watching from. And hit subscribe if you've ever faced a moment where speaking up was terrifying but necessary. And stick around. What happened after I spoke those 2 words shocked everyone in that courtroom. Growing up in our Connecticut suburb felt like living inside a glossy magazine spread. Our 2-story colonial home sat on a perfectly manicured acre, complete with an in-ground pool where we hosted summer barbecues that were the envy of the neighborhood. Dad, Richard Wilson, had built his real estate development company from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful firms in the state. His ambition was relentless, something I once admired about him. Mom, Catherine, had been an elementary school teacher before I was born. She'd loved her job talking about her students with such enthusiasm that her eyes would light up. But when Dad's business started taking off, they decided together, or so I believed then, that she would stay home to raise me and my younger brother, Ethan. Your mother's most important job is taking care of this family, Dad would say, his arm around Mom's shoulders. She would smile and nod, and I thought that meant she agreed. Now I understand the complexity behind that smile. Some of my earliest memories are genuinely happy ones. When I was 5, Dad spent an entire Saturday teaching me to ride my bike without training wheels. He ran alongside me, holding the seat, until I found my balance, cheering louder than anyone when I finally pedaled on my own. "That's my girl," he shouted, pride radiating from his face. The summer I turned 7, he built us a treehouse in the massive oak in our backyard. It wasn't just any treehouse. It had windows with actual glass, a small desk where I could draw, and even a pulley system to bring up snacks. Dad and I would sit up there for hours, him telling me stories about his childhood or explaining how buildings were constructed. Our weekend fishing trips were sacred. We'd wake before sunrise, pack peanut butter sandwiches and thermoses of hot chocolate, and drive to Lake Winslow where Dad kept his small boat. Ethan was too young to join initially, so these trips were just for Dad and me. He taught me to bait my hook, cast my line, and wait patiently. "Fishing teaches you life's most important lesson, Maddie," he'd say. "Good things come to those who wait." Every night until I was 10, Dad would read me bedtime stories, doing all the character voices and adding dramatic sound effects that made me giggle. I would look forward to those moments all day when my strong, busy father would transform into a playful storyteller just for me. Mom created the emotional foundation of our home. She remembered everyone's favorites. Dad's preference for apple pie over pumpkin, Ethan's love of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets, my obsession with strawberry ice cream. She crafted traditions that made every holiday special. Our Christmas ornament exchange, Valentine's Day treasure hunts, and birthday breakfast in bed, complete with candles and pancakes. Her sacrifice for our family went far beyond giving up her career. She managed our home with precision, coordinating Dad's business dinners, volunteering at our schools, driving us to countless activities, all while making it look effortless. She was the one who bandaged scraped knees, helped with science projects, and stayed up all night when we had the flu. Ethan arrived when I was 3, and from the beginning he was Dad's mini-me. Athletic and outgoing, where I was bookish and thoughtful, he gravitated towards sports, while I preferred art and reading. Dad coached Ethan's little league team and took him to professional games, proudly introducing him as my son, the future MLB star. Their bond was different from the one Dad and I shared, more about achievement and less about imagination. From the outside, we projected the perfect American family. Dad was the successful provider, Mom the devoted homemaker, Ethan the athletic son, and I was the studious daughter. We took annual vacations to Florida or California, posed for professional family portraits in coordinating outfits, and attended community events where Dad was often asked to speak. People looked at us with admiration, and I basked in the security of our seemingly flawless life. But even in those early years, there were subtle signs that not everything was as perfect as it appeared. Dad's standards were impossibly high. An A on my report card would prompt questions about what went wrong, rather than celebration of what went right. Mom would iron Dad's shirts multiple times. If he found even the slightest wrinkle, her hands shaking slightly as she redid her work. As Dad's business grew more successful, he began missing family dinners. One missed dinner became two, then three, until his empty chair at the table was more common than his presence. Mom would keep his plate warm in the oven sometimes until well past my bedtime, just in case he came home early enough to eat with us. "Your father works hard to give us this beautiful life," she would explain when I asked why he wasn't there. "We need to be understanding." I accepted this explanation because I didn't know any better. I didn't yet understand what it meant to give up pieces of yourself until there's almost nothing left. The shift in our family dynamic didn't happen overnight. It crept in gradually, like a shadow lengthening across our perfect lawn as the sun began its slow descent. I was 11 when I first noticed the tension. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Dad's business had expanded significantly, adding commercial properties to his residential developments. With this growth came longer hours, more business trips, and a palpable change in his demeanor. The playful father who built tree houses and read bedtime stories was replaced by someone perpetually distracted, checking his phone during dinner and bringing work calls into family movie nights. "Richard, the kids want to start the movie," Mom would say gently. "They can wait 5 minutes, Catherine." "This call is about the Westbrook project," he'd snap, not bothering to cover the receiver. The first major argument I witnessed happened on a Tuesday evening when I was 12. I was supposed to be upstairs finishing homework, but I'd come down for a glass of water. They didn't notice me frozen in the hallway as their voices carried from the kitchen. "$300 for groceries, Catherine? What are you feeding them, caviar?" Dad's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "Richard, that's for the entire week, plus the ingredients for the dinner party you insisted we host for the Hendersons," Mom replied, her voice quieter but with unusual firmness. "I don't need the attitude. Just be more careful with money. This family doesn't run itself, and I'm the only one bringing in any income." "That's not fair," Mom said, her voice breaking slightly. "We agreed I would stay home with the kids. I gave up my career for this family." Dad's laugh was cold. "Your career teaching finger painting to 6-year-olds. Let's not pretend you sacrificed a position at NASA." I watched Mom's face crumple before she composed herself, noticing me standing there. "Madison, sweetie, go finish your homework. Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. Dad started checking Mom's receipts, questioning every purchase. He moved her from a credit card to a debit card linked to an account he controlled, depositing a strict allowance each month, despite our family's increasing wealth. When the card was occasionally declined because he forgot to transfer funds, Mom would call him with embarrassment in her voice while standing at a checkout line. "Mom, is Dad mad at you?" I asked one day after he'd criticized her for buying name-brand cereal. "No, honey," she sighed, rearranging items in the pantry. "Dad just works very hard for our money and he wants to make sure we're being responsible." "But we're rich, aren't we?" "Your friend Leslie said Dad's company is worth millions." Mom's hands stopped moving. "Wealth is complicated, Madison, and it's not polite to discuss money with friends." She changed the subject, but I noticed how she started cutting coupons despite our supposed prosperity. By the time I entered 8th grade, Dad had developed 2 distinct personalities, Public Richard and Private Richard. Public Richard charmed at community events, made generous donations to local charities, and was described as the most approachable millionaire in town. He'd put his arm around Mom at parties, calling her the real success behind Wilson Developments. Private Richard monitored Mom's whereabouts, questioning her if she was gone too long at the grocery store. He criticized her, cooking her, cleaning her parenting decisions. The word worthless slipped into his vocabulary with increasing frequency. "This house is a mess, Catherine. What do you even do all day? Worthless effort." The first time I heard him say it standing in our spotless kitchen, something cold settled in my stomach. Mom's face registered the hurt for just a second before her features smoothed into a pleasant mask. My grades began to slip as concentration became impossible. I'd stare at textbooks while replaying Dad's latest cruel comment in my head, trying to understand how the father, who'd once been my hero, could speak to Mom that way. Ethan remained oblivious, protected by Dad's favoritism and his own busy schedule of sports and social activities. At 15, he was already being scouted by high school coaches while still in middle school, and Dad attended every game beaming with pride. "Your brother knows how to excel," Dad would say pointedly when my report card showed B's instead of A's. "He understands the Wilson name means something in this town." I tried talking to Mom about Dad's behavior once when he was on a business trip. We were baking cookies, one of our favorite activities together. Mom, Dad seems different. He's mean to you sometimes. Her hands stilled on the rolling pin. Marriage is complicated, sweetheart. Your father is under a lot of pressure, but that doesn't give him the right to. Madison. Her voice was firmer than I'd ever heard it. This isn't something for you to worry about. Your job is to be a teenager, not to analyze your parents' marriage. The subject was closed, but I began paying closer attention. I noticed how Mom checked her phone constantly when she was out, not because she was texting friends, but because Dad would call demanding to know when she'd be home. I saw how she'd flinch slightly when he entered a room unexpectedly. I observed how she'd change outfits if Dad made even a mildly disapproving comment about her appearance. One evening I overheard Dad on the phone in his home office, the door slightly ajar. "I'll meet you at the usual place at 8, he said in a tone I'd never heard him use with Mom. Warm, flirtatious, eager to please. "I've missed you too, baby. Catherine's taking the kids to some school thing. We'll have ours." I backed away from the door, confused and nauseated. When I confronted him the next day, he dismissed my concerns entirely. "You must have misunderstood what you heard, Madison. I was talking to Bob Miller about the Lakeside project. Don't go making up dramatic stories. It's childish and beneath you." His words made me doubt myself, wonder if I had indeed misinterpreted what I'd heard. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it would only grow in the years to come. By sophomore year of high school, our home had become a minefield of tension. Dad's controlling behavior intensified with each promotion and business success. He no longer just monitored Mom's spending. He tracked her entire existence. "Why is there a charge at the coffee shop on Main Street?" he demanded one evening, scrolling through bank statements at the dinner table. "I thought you said you were going to the grocery store and coming straight home." Mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I stopped for coffee with Leslie after shopping. We only talked for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of my time you wasted," Dad muttered. "Next time ask permission before you decide to socialize on my dime." I watched Mom shrink a little more, nodding with downcast eyes. Later that week, I discovered Dad had installed tracking software on Mom's phone when I borrowed it to call a friend after mine died. A notification popped up, location shared with Richard Wilson. When I asked Mom about it, she brushed it off. "Your father worries about me." "It's sweet, really," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Dad also began randomly checking Mom's call logs and text messages, claiming he was looking for a number or helping her clear storage space. She stopped maintaining friendships, too exhausted by the interrogations that followed any social interaction. The discovery that confirmed my worst suspicions happened during junior year. I was searching for a stapler in Dad's home office while he was on a business trip to Chicago. In the back of his desk drawer, I found a second phone. Smaller, cheaper than his usual premium model. Curiosity and dread mixing in my stomach, I turned it on. The screen lit up with dozens of text notifications, all from women's names I didn't recognize. I opened one thread from someone named Veronica, and my world tilted on its axis. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again when your wife takes the kids to her mother's next weekend. Miss your hands on me. Hotel room booked for Wednesday afternoon. Delete these messages, Richard. Don't want another close call like last time." I scrolled through message after message, some dating back years. This wasn't a single indiscretion. It was a pattern, a second life Dad had been living while Mom maintained our home and raised his children. Some messages referenced gifts he'd bought, weekends away he'd funded, all while scrutinizing Mom's every purchase. When Dad returned from his trip, I confronted him in his office hands, shaking as I described what I'd found. "You went through my private things." His voice was dangerously quiet. "That's a violation of my privacy, Madison. You're cheating on Mom, multiple women. For years I could barely contain my outrage. How could you do this to her, to our family?" Dad's expression shifted from anger to calculated calm. "You're 17, Madison. You don't understand adult relationships. Your mother and I have an arrangement." "That's a lie," I said, voice breaking. "Mom has no idea." "This conversation is over," he said, standing to his full height. "And if you breathe a word of this to your mother, I'll cut off your college fund. Not a penny for Dartmouth or any other school. Think carefully about destroying this family with your misguided moral crusade." I backed away, shocked by the stranger before me. "You're not who I thought you were. Grow up, Madison. The world isn't a fairy tale." He turned back to his computer. "Now, get out of my office and stay out of adult business." Mom's mental health deteriorated noticeably that year. She lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her once healthy frame. She developed anxiety attacks before social events where Dad would be present, hyperventilating in the bathroom, while I rubbed her back, and Ethan remained downstairs, oblivious. The vibrant woman who had once created magic in our home became a shadow, second-guessing every decision and apologizing constantly. I confided in my best friend Ashley, finally unburdening myself about what was happening at home. "That's not normal, Madison," she said, concern etching her features. "My mom says that's financial abuse, controlling someone through money." Ashley's parents exchanged worried glances when I was invited to dinner at their house and explained why Mom couldn't join community activities anymore. "Your mom can always come stay with us if she needs to," Ashley's mother offered carefully, but I didn't understand the full implication of her words at the time. I began documenting everything in a journal, recording dates, incidents, and patterns of behavior. Some primitive instinct told me this evidence might matter someday, though I couldn't have imagined how prescient that action would prove to be. Then came the night that shattered any remaining illusions I had about our family. I was studying late around midnight when I heard raised voices from my parents' bedroom. This wasn't unusual, but something in Mom's tone, a desperation I hadn't heard before, made me move quietly down the hall. "I know about Veronica," Mom was saying, her voice trembling. "And Jessica. And whoever you were with in Chicago." A crash. Something hitting the wall. Then Dad's voice low and menacing. "You've been spying on me." "A credit card statement came to the house instead of your office," Mom replied. "Hotel charges, jewelry, purchases on days that weren't my birthday or our anniversary. So you decided to play detective stupid move, Catherine." I peered through the barely open door in time to see Dad grab Mom's wrist, twisting until she gasped in pain. "Richard, stop. You're hurting me." "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed, his free hand gripping her face. "Everything you have is because of me. The clothes on your back, this house, the food you eat, all mine. You think you can threaten me. Without me, you're nothing." I must have made a sound, a gasp or whimper, because Dad's head whipped toward the door. He released Mom instantly, his expression transforming from rage to concern so quickly it was terrifying. "Madison, sweetheart, your mother and I are just having a discussion," he said, voice honey smooth. "Go back to bed." I looked at Mom, her wrist already bruising, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, it's fine, honey," she whispered. "Just a misunderstanding." I backed away, retreating to my room, where I shook under my covers, the reality of our family situation crystallizing with horrible clarity. What I'd witnessed wasn't just controlling behavior or emotional cruelty. It was abuse, plain and simple, and it had likely been happening for years behind closed doors. That night changed everything. I could no longer pretend we were just a family with communication problems. The truth was darker, more dangerous, and I was terrified for my mother's safety. I chose Northeastern University in Boston for college. Close enough to come home quickly if needed, far enough to escape the suffocating atmosphere of our house. The 4-hour drive between campus and Connecticut became a buffer between two worlds, one where I was just another freshman finding her way, and another where I carried the weight of my family's secrets. Every Sunday night, Mom and I had phone calls while Dad was at his regular golf game. Her voice would brighten talking about her garden or community projects, but a heaviness remained underneath. "Have things improved with Dad?" I asked, during one call my sophomore year. The pause told me everything before she even spoke. "He's under a lot of pressure with the new development in Westbrook. You know how he gets." Translation: nothing had changed. If anything, my absence had removed one witness to Dad's behavior, giving him more freedom to control and manipulate. During holiday breaks, I'd noticed new changes in Mom. Her once confident opinions on books and current events had disappeared, replaced by, "Well, your father thinks." She'd check her watch, constantly panic flickering across her face if we were running late getting home from shopping. She stopped wearing her favorite red sweater because Dad had once commented it made her look desperate for attention. Meanwhile, Dad was flourishing publicly. Wilson Developments had expanded to 3 states. He'd been profiled in business magazines and invited to speak at industry conferences. Our family's social standing had never been higher, the contrast between public perception and private reality never more stark. Ethan, now a college baseball player at USC, remained Dad's golden child, blissfully unaware or willfully blind to what was happening. During one Christmas break, I tried talking to him. "Have you noticed how thin Mom looks? How she barely speaks when Dad's around?" Ethan rolled his eyes. "Mom's fine. She's just doing that new diet with her friends. And maybe she'd talk more if she had something interesting to say. Dad's running a multi-state company. What's Mom doing that compares to that? His casual dismissal stunned me. The Wilson family poison had infected him, too. The belief that worth was measured by earning potential, that Mom's contributions were somehow less valuable because they couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. The final holiday dinner before everything imploded happened during winter break of my senior year. Dad had invited his newest business partners and their wives for an elaborate meal that Mom had spent days preparing. I'd come home early to help her, watching her hands shake as she worried whether the roast was perfectly medium rare the way Dad insisted. During dinner, one of the partners complimented Mom's table setting. "Catherine has a good eye for these things," Dad said with his public smile. "Though sometimes her taste exceeds our budget. Don't you, dear?" The undercurrent was clear to me, though the guests laughed comfortably. "Actually," I interjected, "Mom created this entire tablescape with items she already had. She's incredible at making something beautiful from very little." Dad's eyes flashed warning at me. When the guests moved to the living room for coffee, he cornered me in the kitchen. "Don't ever contradict me in front of business associates again," he whispered, gripped tight on my arm. "Your college tuition is still coming from my pocket. Remember that before you decide to play family defender." Something in me snapped. "Is that your solution to everything, financial threats? No wonder Mom stays. You've made sure she can't afford to leave." His face darkened. "Your mother stays because she knows which side her bread is buttered on. She's nothing without me, and she knows it. She was a whole person before you, Dad. A teacher, a friend, someone with dreams. You've just convinced her she's nothing so you can control her." I didn't see Mom standing in the doorway until Dad's expression changed. The look that passed between them told me she'd heard everything. 2 weeks after I returned to campus, Mom called me from a number I didn't recognize. "I've filed for divorce," she said, voice stronger than I'd heard in years. "I'm staying at a small apartment near Linwood Street. Your father didn't take it well." The understatement of the century. Dad had exploded when served with papers, throwing Mom out of the house with just a suitcase, cutting off access to all accounts, even canceling her cell phone plan, which was why she was calling from a new number. "He says he'll leave me with nothing," Mom said. "That no judge will award me anything since I haven't worked in 25 years. That he'll drag this out until I can't afford a lawyer anymore." Dad had hired Gregory Peters, the most aggressive divorce attorney in the state, known for scorched earth tactics. Mom had found Diane Murphy a competent but less flashy lawyer who had agreed to a payment plan. When I visited Mom's apartment the following weekend, the contrast with our family home was heartbreaking. 1-bedroom bare walls, second-hand furniture in a building where the hallways smelled of old cooking oil. She'd found part-time work at a florist shop, but the pay barely covered utilities after rent. "I need to get some personal items from the house," Mom explained. "Photos, my grandmother's jewelry, some important documents." Richard agreed to let us come when he's at a business meeting tomorrow. We entered our family home with keys that no longer felt like ours. Mom moved efficiently, gathering irreplaceable items while I boxed up her clothes. In Dad's office, she pointed to a filing cabinet. "There should be copies of our tax returns in there and information about our investments. My lawyer says I need them." As we searched through files, I discovered a hidden compartment in the back of the drawer containing documents I'd never seen before. Financial statements for accounts in the Cayman Islands. Records of cash transfers to numbered accounts. Business ledgers showing 2 sets of books. Official numbers for taxes, and actual numbers reflecting much larger sums. Most damning was a folder labeled Westbrook Heights, containing evidence of bribes to local officials and falsified environmental reports. I recognized it as Dad's newest luxury development built on land that had been controversial due to wetland conservation issues. "Mom, look at this," I said, spreading the documents on Dad's desk. "This is serious financial misconduct. Maybe even criminal." Mom's hands trembled as she examined the papers. I had no idea. "We need to make copies," I decided, feeding sheets into Dad's scanner. "Your lawyer needs to see these." We were so focused on the task that we didn't hear Dad's car in the driveway. His voice from the doorway froze us both. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He stood there, face contorted with rage. "Those are private business documents." "Documents showing you've been hiding assets," I said, standing protectively in front of Mom, "and apparently breaking multiple laws." Dad stepped toward us, menace in every movement. "Give me those papers and get out of my house." Catherine, if you think you're taking a cent more than I decide to give you, you're delusional. This was my house, too, Mom said, voice shaking but determined. I raised your children here. I built this life with you. You did nothing, Dad shouted. Mask completely dropped. Now, I built everything I earned, everything. You were along for the ride, and now you want half. For what, spreading your legs and doing basic household chores any maid could do better. I'd never seen such naked contempt on anyone's face. In that moment, I knew we needed to leave immediately. Grabbing the USB drive with our scanned documents and as many papers as I could, I pulled Mom toward the door. Dad's threats followed us to the car. You take this further, Catherine, and you'll regret it. I'll destroy you in court. No one crosses Richard Wilson. As we drove away, Mom silent beside me, I realized I needed legal advice of my own. The documents we'd found went beyond divorce proceedings. They were evidence of potential crimes. My father had just become a true threat, not just to our family's emotional well-being, but to our safety and security. The decision crystallized in that moment. I would do whatever necessary to protect my mother, even if it meant testifying against my father in court. The Suffolk County Courthouse loomed imposingly against the April sky, its granite steps crowded with lawyers in dark suits, clutching briefcases and coffee cups. Mom and I paused at the entrance, both taking deep breaths before pushing through the heavy wooden doors. Remember what Diane said, I murmured to Mom as we navigated the bustling corridor. Stay calm no matter what Dad's lawyer says. They want to provoke an emotional response. Mom nodded, her knuckles white around her purse strap. She looked both fragile and determined in her navy dress, the most professional outfit she owned that still fit her diminished frame. Courtroom 304 was already buzzing with activity when we entered. Dad sat at the plaintiff's table with Gregory Peters and 2 junior associates, a full legal battalion compared to Mom's single attorney. The message was clear: overwhelming force would be applied. Dad didn't acknowledge us, but I caught the satisfied smirk when he noted Mom's simple attire compared to his tailored suit. He'd always used appearances to establish dominance, and today was no exception. Judge Harriet Coleman entered, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, with shrewd eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they landed on. Wilson versus Wilson, preliminary asset division hearing, the bailiff announced. Peters opened with a masterful performance, painting Dad as the sole architect of the family's success. Your Honor, Mr. Wilson built his company from nothing, working 16-hour days while Mrs. Wilson enjoyed the fruits of his labor. She contributed nothing to the acquisition of these assets and is therefore entitled to minimal support, not the outrageous 50% she's demanding. Diane Murphy presented Mom's case competently, but lacked Peter's courtroom theatrics. Mrs. Wilson gave up her teaching career at Mr. Wilson's request. She raised their children, managed their household, and hosted business events that directly contributed to Mr. Wilson's success. 25 years of partnership deserves equitable division. As financial statements were presented, I watched the judge's expression. The numbers showed Dad's publicly acknowledged assets. Impressive, but nowhere near his actual worth given what we'd discovered in his office. He'd hidden the most valuable properties and accounts, presenting a diminished version of his wealth to minimize Mom's potential settlement. Mrs. Wilson has no head for business, Dad testified when called to the stand. She has no concept of the work that went into building Wilson Developments. She contributed nothing to my success. From my seat in the gallery, I felt physically ill hearing him erase Mom's contributions so completely. The judge was taking notes, her expression neutral, but leaning toward sympathetic to Dad's polished presentation. Peters called a series of witnesses, Dad's business associates, who testified to rarely seeing Mom at important meetings, implying her irrelevance to the company's success. Mom's attorney objected repeatedly, but the narrative was taking shape. Catherine Wilson was an accessory, not a partner. When Mom took the stand, Peters' cross-examination was brutal. Mrs. Wilson, can you name the primary investors in your husband's lakeside development? I wasn't involved in that aspect. Can you explain how construction loans were leveraged for the Eastbrook property? No, Richard handled the financial details. So you admit you had no active role in building the company whose assets you now claim entitlement to? Mom looked trapped. I supported Richard in other ways. By other ways, you mean domestic duties, tasks for which many people earn minimum wage? Diane objected, but the damage was done. Mom appeared exactly as Dad wanted her to seem, uninvolved and undeserving. When Dad returned to the stand, he delivered the final blow. I built everything myself, he declared, with practiced sincerity. Every property, every deal, every dollar was earned through my efforts alone. Catherine contributed nothing of value to the business that justifies her taking half of what I spent my life building. Something inside me snapped. The lies, the erasure of Mom's sacrifices, the rewriting of our family history. It was too much to bear silently. I scribbled a note and passed it to Mom, who read it with wide eyes before handing it to her lawyer. Diane approached the bench for a whispered conference with the judge. After a moment, Judge Coleman looked directly at me. The court calls Madison Wilson as a witness. Dad's head whipped around, shock replacing his confident expression. As I moved to the witness stand, I caught his glare. A warning I chose to ignore. After being sworn in, I answered Diane's preliminary questions about my relationship to both parties. Then came the questions about family dynamics. How would you characterize your parents' marriage, Miss Wilson? I took a deep breath. My father controlled every aspect of our lives, especially my mother's. She wasn't allowed independent access to family finances despite running the household. He monitored her whereabouts, isolated her from friends, and belittled her contributions. Peters objected immediately. Speculative and irrelevant to asset division, Your Honor. I'll allow it, Judge Coleman replied. The nature of the marital partnership is relevant to equitable distribution. I described the patterns I'd witnessed: Dad's escalating control, Mom's diminishing autonomy, the stark contrast between his public persona and private behavior. And how did your father speak about your mother's contributions to the family? He called her worthless, I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion building in my throat. He said she did nothing of value. But that's a lie. My mother was the backbone of our family and his business. She organized client dinners, maintained relationships with their wives, created a perfect home that impressed everyone who visited. His success was built on her invisible labor. Peters rose for cross-examination, his approach immediately aggressive. Miss Wilson, isn't it true you've had a strained relationship with your father in recent years? Yes. Since I discovered his multiple affairs and financial manipulation of my mother. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Peters faltered momentarily. That's an outrageous accusation. I found his second phone with messages from at least 3 women spanning years. I continued looking directly at Dad, all while he scrutinized every dollar my mother spent and claimed they couldn't afford basic expenses. Dad leaned forward to whisper urgently to Peters, who tried to redirect. Your Honor, this witness is clearly biased, and her testimony is irrelevant to asset division. Judge Coleman studied me carefully. Young woman, do you have any direct knowledge of financial matters relevant to these proceedings? This was the moment, the culmination of years of secrets and discovered documents. I met the judge's eyes directly. Yes, Your Honor. While helping my mother retrieve her belongings from the family home, I discovered hidden financial records, multiple offshore accounts, properties not disclosed in these proceedings, and a second set of books for my father's company showing much higher profits than reported. Dad half rose from his chair, face contorted with rage. Peters placed a restraining hand on his arm. Furthermore, I continued, my voice lowering so the courtroom leaned in to hear I found evidence of serious financial crimes connected to the Westbrook Heights development. The judge's eyebrows raised. What kind of evidence? I leaned closer to the microphone and whispered the 2 words that changed everything: money laundering. Judge Coleman's face paled visibly. The courtroom fell silent. Your Honor, I added, I have documentation supporting these claims that I'm prepared to submit to the court and, if necessary, to the appropriate authorities. Dad lunged forward. She's lying. This is absurd. Mr. Wilson, control yourself, Judge Coleman snapped before turning back to me. Miss Wilson, these are extremely serious allegations. Yes, Your Honor, and I don't make them lightly. The judge called an immediate recess, requesting that I join her in chambers along with both attorneys. Dad tried to approach me as I stepped down from the witness stand, but a court officer moved between us. You ungrateful little, he began, before Peters pulled him back, whispering urgently in his ear. Mom sat frozen in her chair, shock and fear battling on her face. I squeezed her hand as I passed. It'll be okay, I promised, though I had no idea if that was true. In chambers, I provided copies of the documents we'd found and explained where each had been discovered. Judge Coleman examined them silently, her expression growing graver with each page. I'll need to review these thoroughly, she finally said. and some may need to be referred to the district attorney's office. She fixed Dad's lawyer with a stern look. Mr. Peters, I strongly suggest you confer with your client about full financial disclosure before we reconvene. The court takes evidence of hidden assets extremely seriously. When we returned to the courtroom, everything had changed. The power dynamic had shifted palpably. Dad's confidence replaced by barely contained panic as he huddled with his legal team. Judge Coleman addressed the court. In light of new evidence suggesting potentially undisclosed assets, this hearing is continued until next week. Additionally, I'm issuing a temporary order freezing all assets held by Richard Wilson personally or through his business entities pending full financial investigation. Mrs. Wilson will receive temporary support of $10,000 monthly during these proceedings. As we left the courthouse, reporters who'd gotten wind of the dramatic testimony approached with questions. Mom and I hurried past them to Diane's waiting car. What happens now? Mom asked, her voice small. Now, Diane replied with the first smile I'd seen on her face, we prepare for a very different negotiation. Your husband's priority just shifted from keeping assets from you to keeping himself out of prison. The week following my testimony was a whirlwind of legal activity. Judge Coleman appointed a forensic accountant to examine all of Dad's financial records, while Mom's lawyer worked with the prosecutor's office to determine which documents suggested criminal activity. When we reconvened in court 7 days later, the atmosphere was completely transformed. Dad's powerful presence had diminished noticeably. His suit seemed to hang on his frame, dark circles underscored his eyes, and gone was the confident smirk I'd grown to hate. Gregory Peters had brought in additional counsel, a criminal defense attorney whose presence confirmed the serious nature of what my testimony had unleashed. Mom and I sat behind Diane, both nervous but resolute in our determination to see this through. Judge Coleman entered her manner even more serious than before. Before we continue these proceedings, I want to address the financial evidence submitted last week. Mr. Peters has your client prepared a complete accounting of assets as requested. Peters approached the bench with a thick folder. Your Honor, my client has prepared a more comprehensive financial statement. However, we maintain that many of the documents provided by Madison Wilson were taken out of context and do not indicate any wrongdoing. The judge's expression remained skeptical. The forensic accountant's preliminary findings suggest otherwise, Counselor. There appear to be significant discrepancies between Ms. Wilson's previously filed statements and actual assets. I was called back to the witness stand where Peters' cross-examination took a much more aggressive turn, attempting to undermine my credibility. Miss Wilson, you accessed your father's private office without permission, correct? I was helping my mother retrieve her personal belongings, which Dad had agreed to. And you took documents that didn't belong to you. I copied documents that showed my father was hiding assets that legally should be part of the divorce settlement. Isn't it true that you have resentment toward your father for his strict parenting? I met his gaze steadily. I resent that he emotionally abused my mother for years while cheating on her with multiple women. I resent that he threatened to cut off my college funding if I told her about his affairs. I resent that he called the woman who devoted her life to our family worthless. Is that what you're asking? Peters changed tactics. You have no financial training or business education. Isn't it possible you misinterpreted legitimate business documents? The documents clearly showed 2 sets of books, one for taxes and one showing actual profits. And accounts in the Cayman Islands aren't typically opened for legitimate business purposes. So you're an expert on international banking now, Peters' tone was mocking. No, but the forensic accountant is. I believe his report confirms everything I testified to last week. Peters' face tightened. He knew he was losing ground. Let's discuss the alleged evidence of money laundering you claim to have found. What exactly do you think you saw? I detailed the Westbrook Heights documents methodically. The payments to shell companies that traced back to local officials who approved permits despite environmental concerns. The falsified environmental impact reports the cash, transactions designed to hide the source of funds. These were all in a folder labeled Westbrook Heights Special Arrangements, I concluded. The project that mysteriously received approval after 2 years of being blocked by environmental regulations. Dad lunged to his feet. She's twisting everything. This is revenge because I demanded she maintain decent grades in college. Mr. Wilson, control yourself or you'll be removed, Judge Coleman warned sharply. When Dad's lawyer attempted to dismiss my testimony as misunderstood, legitimate business dealings, the judge called for the forensic accountant to testify. Martin Reeves, a methodical man with 30 years' experience, walked the court through his findings. The documents Miss Wilson provided led us to discover approximately $12 million in undisclosed assets, he explained, displaying charts on a screen for the court. These funds were methodically moved through a series of offshore accounts designed to obscure their origin and ownership. He confirmed the existence of the second set of books I'd described and verified that the Westbrook Heights documents showed concerning patterns that warranted further investigation by authorities. In my professional opinion, Reeves concluded these financial arrangements appear designed specifically to hide assets from tax authorities, business partners, and potentially from divorce proceedings. During a brief recess, I found Mom in the hallway, her face pale but composed. "Are you okay?" I asked, taking her hands in mine. "I never wanted it to come to this," she whispered. "I just wanted a fair settlement so I could rebuild my life. I never imagined Richard was involved in anything illegal." "You deserve more than what he was offering," I assured her. "You gave him 25 years of your life." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I'm proud of you for standing up for the truth, Madison. But I'm also terrified about what happens next." When court resumed, Judge Coleman addressed the attorneys. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm ordering a complete freeze of all assets belonging to Richard Wilson and Wilson Developments pending further investigation. Mrs. Wilson's temporary support will continue, and she is granted exclusive use of the family residence until final disposition." She fixed Dad with a stern look. "Mr. Wilson, I'm referring the documentation regarding the Westbrook Heights project to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. You are ordered not to leave the state without the court's permission." Dad's face drained of color as the implications sank in. His empire wasn't just being divided, it was being scrutinized for criminal activity. His carefully constructed façade was crumbling before his eyes. As we prepared to leave, Dad approached us, evading his lawyer's restraining hand. "This isn't over," he hissed, voice low enough that only Mom and I could hear. "You'll regret turning on me, both of you." A court officer stepped between us. "Sir, step back from Mrs. Wilson." The threat lingered in the air as we walked away. Mom was shaking so badly I had to help her into the elevator. "He can't hurt us anymore," I told her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The truth is out now." But as we drove home to Mom's apartment, I wondered what the cost of that truth would ultimately be. I'd exposed my father's crimes to protect my mother, but in doing so I'd potentially sent him to prison. The weight of that reality settled heavily on my shoulders as we drove in silence through the gathering dusk. The weeks following the courtroom, revelation unfolded like scenes from a movie I never wanted to star in. Dad was released on $500,000 bail with strict conditions. Surrender of his passport, weekly check-ins with a court officer, and an ankle monitor that restricted him to his home and office. The business empire he'd built began to crumble as news of the investigation spread. Investors pulled out of ongoing projects, partners distanced themselves, and the glossy magazine that had once featured him as Connecticut's real estate visionary now ran a story titled "The Fall of Richard Wilson." Mom received a temporary order giving her access to $25,000 monthly from family accounts, while the forensic accountants continued their work. She moved back into the family home while Dad was forced to rent a condo across town. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The controller had lost control. For me, the aftermath was complicated. I'd done the right thing morally, but guilt still gnawed at me for exposing family secrets so publicly. I took a leave of absence from my final semester of college, unable to focus on classes while the legal proceedings consumed our lives. "You shouldn't put your life on hold," Mom insisted when I told her my decision. "This isn't your burden to carry. I'm the one who found the documents, Mom. I'm the key witness. I can't just pretend everything's normal." The reality was that nothing felt normal anymore. Our family had been irreparably fractured. Even more painful was the reaction from my brother Ethan, who flew home from California in a fury after the news broke. "How could you do this to Dad?" he demanded, confronting me in Mom's kitchen. "Do you have any idea what you've done to our family name, to his business?" "What Dad did to himself, you mean," I corrected, trying to stay calm. "He's the one who committed financial crimes, Ethan. He's the one who hid assets and lied under oath. You had no right to air our family's dirty laundry in public. Mom asked for a divorce, fine, but this criminal charges asset freezes. You've destroyed everything." Mom tried to intervene. "Ethan, your sister was protecting me by sending Dad to prison," he shouted. "Great protection, Madison. Really thinking about the family there." He stormed out, returning to California without speaking to me again. His social media posts made clear where his loyalty remained. Firmly with Dad, who in Ethan's eyes was the victim of vindictive women and overzealous prosecutors. The wider fallout was equally painful. Half our family friends disappeared, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Others took sides, creating awkward encounters at the grocery store or gas station. Mom's sister came to stay with her, providing much-needed support, but Dad's family closed ranks around him, refusing to speak to either of us. Local news outlets covered the story relentlessly. One day, while getting coffee, I overheard a woman at the next table. "That's her, the daughter who turned on her father. Can you imagine betraying your own family like that?" I left without my coffee, fighting tears all the way to the car. The district attorney's office interviewed me multiple times, each session more grueling than the last, as they built their case against Dad. They were particularly interested in the Westbrook Heights development, which had become the centerpiece of their investigation. "The environmental report falsification alone is a significant offense," explained Assistant DA Marlene Chen during one meeting. "But the payments to local officials elevate this to public corruption." Dad's legal team made a last desperate attempt to discredit me, claiming I'd stolen the documents as revenge for being disciplined as a teenager. When that failed, they floated rumors that I had mental health issues that made my testimony unreliable. The attacks felt deeply personal, designed to punish me for speaking up. Through it all, Mom slowly began to reclaim her identity. She joined a support group for women leaving controlling relationships, started therapy, and even enrolled in classes to update her teaching credentials. "I forgot who I was, Madison," she told me one evening as we sorted through old photo albums. "Somewhere along the way, I became an extension of your father rather than my own person." "I always saw you, Mom," I said, showing her a drawing I'd made in second grade. A stick figure labeled Mom with a crown and cape. "Supermom, remember? You were my hero even when you couldn't be your own." The divorce proceedings continued in parallel with the criminal investigation. With the evidence of hidden assets now undeniable, Dad's legal position had collapsed. The final settlement awarded Mom 60% of the marital assets, an estimated $22 million once everything was tallied, plus the family home and ongoing support. "Your father's attorney has proposed a deal in the criminal matter," Diane informed us after a particularly long day in court. "He'll plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation regarding other business associates involved in the Westbrook Heights situation." The plea bargain was eventually accepted: 18 months in a minimum security facility, plus 5 years probation and significant financial penalties. It was a far cry from the potential 15 years he'd faced if convicted at trial. The day Dad was sentenced, I sat in the back of the courtroom watching the man who had once seemed larger than life stand diminished before the judge. He'd lost weight, his custom suits replaced by an off-the-rack navy blazer that somehow emphasized how far he'd fallen. When given the opportunity to speak, he expressed regret for errors in judgment, but stopped short of a full apology to those he'd hurt. He didn't look at me once during the proceeding. As they led him away to begin his sentence, a complex storm of emotions washed over me. Relief that justice had been served, sadness for what our family had lost, and a strange, unexpected pity for a man who had everything but threw it away, through greed and cruelty. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions as Mom and I tried to reach our car. "Catherine, how does it feel to see your ex-husband sentenced? Madison, do you regret turning in your father?" Mom surprised me by stopping and turning to face the cameras. "My ex-husband made his own choices. My daughter showed extraordinary courage in standing up for the truth. We're focusing now on healing and moving forward. That's all we have to say." With quiet dignity, she took my arm, and we walked to the car together, neither victorious nor defeated, just survivors of a storm we hadn't created but had found the strength to weather. 3 years have passed since that day in the courtroom when 2 whispered words changed everything. Time hasn't erased the difficult memories, but it has softened their edges, allowing space for new beginnings and unexpected growth. Mom turned 53 last month. We celebrated in her new home, not as grand as our family house, but entirely hers, purchased with her portion of the settlement. The woman who hosted that dinner party bore little resemblance to the shadow who had inhabited my childhood home. Her eyes sparkle now. She laughs without checking to see if it's appropriate. She makes decisions without seeking anyone's approval. I'm thinking of opening a small tutoring center, she announced over dessert. For kids who struggle with reading, I miss teaching more than I expected. She's been dating Robert, a kind-hearted architecture professor, for about a year. Their relationship progresses at a pace she controls with boundaries she establishes. Sometimes I catch her looking startled when he asks her preference about something simple, which restaurant to try or what movie to watch, as if having opinions that matter is still a novelty. My own healing journey has been complicated. Therapy twice weekly for the first year helped me process the guilt and confusion. I had to reconcile the father who taught me to ride a bike with the man who threatened and controlled my mother. I had to accept that both versions were real. The loving dad and the abusive husband could exist in the same person. Setting boundaries became my focus. I finished my degree, started a marketing job in Boston, and built a life independent of family drama. I learned to answer difficult questions. Yes, that's my father who was involved in that case. No, I don't regret testifying. Yes, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. My relationship with Ethan has slowly begun to mend. After a year of minimal contact, he called unexpectedly one evening. "I visited Dad yesterday," he said, his voice subdued. He admitted everything. Not just the financial stuff, but how he treated Mom all those years. A pause. "I should have seen it. I should have believed you." "You saw what you wanted to see," I replied, not unkindly. "We all did for a long time. We're not close yet, but we're talking." He comes home for holidays now, making awkward but genuine efforts to reconnect with Mom. The three of us are learning to be a family without Dad at the center. I visited Dad only once during his incarceration. The conversation was stilted, full of carefully navigated topics and unspoken accusations. He looked older, humbled, though flashes of his former self emerged when he spoke about how unfairly he'd been treated by the justice system. Near the end of our visit, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why did you do it, Madison? Why turn on your own father?" I considered all possible answers before settling on the simplest truth. Because it was right. Because Mom deserved better. Because I couldn't stay silent knowing what I knew. He nodded slowly, whether in understanding or resignation I couldn't tell. As I stood to leave, he said, "I wasn't always the man you saw in that courtroom." "I know," I replied. "That's what makes it all so sad. I don't know if we'll ever rebuild any meaningful relationship. Some betrayals cut too deep, some wounds resist healing. But I've made peace with my decision and its consequences. The most important lessons from this journey weren't about money or justice, but about recognizing abuse in its subtle forms. Dad's control began, with small criticisms escalated to financial restriction, and ultimately became complete domination. Mom didn't see it happening because it evolved so gradually. The proverbial frog in slowly heating water. I've learned to document everything, trust my instincts, and recognize red flags in relationships. I've become hyper-aware of power dynamics and financial control. These lessons have made me more cautious, but also more compassionate toward others in similar situations. Mom's transformation has been the greatest reward. Last month, she testified before a state legislative committee considering a bill about financial abuse in marriages. "Economic control is abuse," she told them, her voice clear and confident. "It leaves no bruises but breaks you just the same." She's reconnected with old friends, rediscovered her love of gardening and painting, and speaks up when something bothers her. The woman who apologized for existing now advocates for herself without shame. "You saved me," she said recently as we walked along the beach near her home. I shook my head. "You saved yourself, Mom. I just created the opportunity." "You had the courage I couldn't find," she insisted, squeezing my hand. "Until I saw you stand up to him, I didn't believe it was possible." Perhaps that's the final lesson in all of this: courage is contagious. By finding my voice, I helped Mom reclaim hers. By speaking truth in that courtroom, I created space for healing that would have been impossible in silence. For anyone watching who recognizes their own story in ours, please know that breaking free is possible. Document everything. Build a support network. Know that you deserve better. The path out is never easy, but on the other side lies the person you were always meant to be. Uncontrolled, undiminished, free. I sometimes think about those two whispered words that changed everything. Money laundering wasn't just an accusation. It was a declaration of independence. A refusal to remain complicit, a choice to value truth over comfort. Sometimes justice requires us to speak when every instinct screams to stay silent. Sometimes love means risking everything to protect those we care about. Sometimes healing can only begin after the painful truth has been exposed to light. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice between loyalty and doing what's right? Have you witnessed controlling behavior in relationships around you? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize their situation and find the courage to change it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you. And remember, speaking your truth is always an act of courage, even when your voice shakes. Thank you for listening to our story.